Rancid air clings to Samuel Fitzwilliam as he watches his duplicate unravel thread by thread on a vintage television. The screen's glow, a sickly greenish pall, bleeds onto the peeling burnt sienna wallpaper, its pattern now a bleeding mosaic beneath the flickering image. His own duplicate, a perfect echo of his high school uniform, dissolves into static, each pixel fragmenting like dry bone, the sound a high-pitched fundy crackle that vibrates the fillings in my teeth. The broadcast compound, decayed broadcast tower looms beyond the grimy window, its skeletal frame swallowed by the thick yellow smog that muffles the city, distant sirens into a dull, wet thud. The television's static hum syncs with the compound, own oppressive vibration, a subsonic thrum that rattles the loose concrete floor beneath my worn sneakers. It has the sound of pressure building, of something immense and ancient pressing against the thin membrane of this place. My fingers trace the cold metal of the antique key in my pocket, the one labeled footy. The central hub, 3:07 a.m. asterisk in spidery script. The key's edges bite into my palm, a sharp counterpoint to the dull ache of the vibration in my bones. I pull it out. The smog thickens, turning the room into a sepia nightmare, obscuring the crumbling facade of the compound's facade beyond the window. The duplicate on screen shudders violently, its form dissolving faster now, threads of static pulling it apart like rotten lace. A low frid whine builds in the television. Speaker, merging with the thrum, a sound felt in the marrow, more than heard. My skin prickles with the sensation of the sensory anomaly, the feeling of tiny brittle bones shifting under my skin, a constant internal cracking. It intensifies as I stare, a cold dread pooling in my gut. The cat, perched on the dusty console beside the television, lets out a slow, resonant purr. Its claws polished obsidian catch the television's sickly light as it arches its back. The purr deepens, amplifying the thrum, making the static footy hiss a louder, sharper. The duplicate's head dissolves first, the static coalescing into a fleeting, screaming mouth before vanishing. The television screen flickers violently, the image of my own unraveling self replaced by a fractured reflection of the room itself, broken glass, the peeling wallpaper, the smog, choked window. The reflection twinks with a moment of perfect, impossible clarity. My breath hitches. This is the key's effect, the reflective surface showing the viewer's demise. The duplicate was a preview. The reflection is the moment of impact. The vibration surges, a physical force now, shaking the key in my hand. The smog seems to thicken into a tangible fog, pressing against the window pane with cold, wet weight. The television's static hisses a louder, a distorted, metallic rasp like tearing metal. The screen begins to warp, the glass distorting the reflection into something deeper, darker. I feel the resonance in my chest cavity, a deep, resonant chime echoing in my skull. The duplicate's final thread dissolves. The screen shatters inward, not outwards, but between two, the void behind it, a silent, impossible implosion. The glass vanishes, leaving only abyssal darkness where the image should be. The smog swallows the window, the tower, the entire compound. Only the vibration remains, a deep, guttural frithrum that fills the room, the silence after the shattering scream. My fingers, drawn by a compulsion I cannot name, reach towards the void where the screen was. The vibration pulses through my bones, the brittle shift under my skin intensifying into a sharp, internal snapped. My fingertip meets the void. A brittle snap echoes, sharp and final, as the darkness swallows my hand. The soles of my sneakers stick to the concrete, each step a wet, thin schlick against the slick, yellow-tinged film coating the floor. The smog doesn't just fill the air, it too presses fid, thick as syrup, clinging to my skin like a second layer. My breath fogs in front of me, but not from the cold. The compound's interior is stale, the temperature suspended somewhere between damp and rot. The hallway stretches endlessly, the walls pulsing with the same subsonic thrum that vibrated through the TV back at the apartment. No landmarks, no doors. Just the slow, rhythmic creak of the compound settling around me, as if it's breathing. I exhale through my nose, the air tasting of rust and old wiring. The cat appears at the far end of the corridor, a flicker of polished obsidian in the murk. No sound precedes it, no padding of paws, no rustle of fur. One moment, the smog is uniform. The next, there it is, poised on the cracked concrete, its tail lashing once before it arches its back and lets out a purr that isn't just heard but felt. The vibration travels up my spine, syncing with the distant, resonant chime of the bell tower. A sound that isn't from this world. Something that resonates in my teeth, in the fillings, in the hollows behind my eyes. The purr deepens, the chime sharpens, and the smog parts just enough for me to see the cat's claws catching the dim light, each one a shard of fractured moonlight I follow. The cat moves with deliberate slowness, as if testing the air with every step. The hallway curves, the walls closing in, the symbols etched into the concrete glowing faintly in the smog's sickly hue spirals, jagged lines, the same script from the key's label. My fingers twitch toward my pocket, the metal of the key pressing against my thigh. The cat pauses at a rusted service hatch, its purr now a steady, rhythmic pulse, the chime a counterpoint that grates against my bones. I bend closer, the symbols beneath my palm cold and rough, like sandpaper. The cat's claws tinkle against the metal once twice, before it steps aside, its eyes fixed on me. I press my palm to the wall. The concrete is alive with the same vibration, the symbols humming under my skin. The smog thickens around the hatch, swirling like liquid gold, obscuring the symbols just as they begin to glow brighter. The cat's purr swells, the chime sharpens into a dissonant wail, and the hatch to engroancy open. A draft rushes out carrying the scent of whetstone and something older, something that smells like the void behind the TV screen. I step forward, and the hatch string clicks shut behind me. The sound is final, a lock engaging, the vibration cutting off abruptly. The smog presses in, the symbols on the walls pulsing like a heartbeat. The cat's purr fades, replaced by the slow, wet Windorfi drip of something seeping from the ceiling. I turn, but there's no handle, no way out. Only the darkness, the symbols, and the knowledge that whatever this chamber is, it's not meant for me to leave. The chime echoes one last time, resonant and hollow, before the silence presses in like the smog itself. The hatch clicked shut and the world tilted, not physically but in perception. The abrupt cessation of vibration left a hollowness in my teeth, a ringing in the bone. The drip continued, a metronome marking the passage of something. I didn't bother to analyze it. Analysis was a habit, a shield. The symbols on the walls pulsed, a sickly internal rhythm. I rotated slowly, cataloging the chamber. Perfectly square, walls of rough-hewn concrete, no visible seams, no discernible purpose. Just containment. Then, the vibration returned. Not as a tremor in the floor, but as a pressure in my skull. It built, a crescendo of subsonic hum, and the smog outside the unseen door shifted. Not in a swirl, but in a ripple, like water disturbed by a submerged stone. The air thickened, the burnt sienna hue intensifying until it felt like wading through molasses. The smell of wet stone intensified too, laced with a metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. Outside, a sound, a high-pitched whine, building in intensity. It wasn't a mechanical whine, but something organic, like metal stretched to its breaking point. Then, the screech tires. A long, drawn-out, agonizing screech of rubber against asphalt. It wasn't loud, not initially, but the vibration amplified it, resonating in my chest cavity until I felt like I was vibrating apart. The sound stopped. Abruptly, a silence descended heavier than the smog itself. Then, a crunch. A sickening wet crunch that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The air shimmered, and through the swirling smog I saw it. A scene, a tableau, a recreation. A car, a rusted sedan, lay crumpled against a wrought iron fence. Headlights, shattered and flickering, cast an anemic glow on the courtyard. Rain slicked the pavement, reflecting the distorted image of the vehicle, and in front of the car a figure, a man. He was reenacting something. He stumbled, arms flailing as if fighting an invisible force. His clothes were faded, the color bleached by time and weather. The same style I'd worn in a dream. A recurring dream I'd dismissed as stress. He turned, his face obscured by shadow, and I felt a jolt of something akin to recognition. The way he held his head, the set of his shoulders. It was me. Or a version of me. He continued his pantomime. The movements jerky and unnatural. He reached out, as if to steady himself, and his hand brushed against something. A key. It fell to the ground, glinting in the fractured light. I focused on the key, the inscription etched into its surface, the broadcast mast end. The words felt familiar, like a forgotten memory surfacing from the depths of my subconscious. The figure began to move again, this time with a frantic urgency. He staggered forward, the car's headlights illuminating his face. The features were distorted, blurred, as if seen through water, but the resemblance was undeniable. It was my face, aged and twisted by some unseen trauma. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound emerged, only a silent scream. The scene flickered, the edges blurring as if a faulty projector. The figure's form destabilized, revealing glimpses of something else beneath, a swirling vortex of darkness, a void that seemed to suck the light from the surroundings. The vibration intensified, pressing against my eardrums, threatening to shatter my skull. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the scene vanished. The car, the figure, the rain gone. Only the swirling smog remained, thicker and more oppressive than before. The smell of ozone hung in the air, sharp and metallic. The drip from the ceiling accelerated, a frantic counterpoint to the lingering echo of the screeching tires. The vibration receded, leaving behind a profound sense of unease. The memory of the scene, the figure's face, the inscription on the key. It all felt like a premonition. A glimpse into a future I desperately hoped to avoid, a future where I was the victim, a faint from sea-like air escaping a punctured lung, and the key vanished into the smog. The cat moved with an unsettling grace, a ripple of polished obsidian fur against the shifting walls. "Which one are you?" The whispers began, a chorus of sibilant doubt that clung to the damp air. They weren't loud, not precisely, but resonated within my skull, amplified by the rhythmic fuddy purr, thrum of the cat as it led me deeper into the compound. The corridors weren't straight, not anymore. They curved, they folded, the concrete walls seeming to fin to breathe, the rough texture under my fingertips constantly changing. Each reflection I caught in the slick surfaces showed a stranger, a man with haunted eyes, a sneer twisting his lips, a face that was almost, but not quite, mine. The disorientation was efficient. It bypassed panic, settling into a cold, clinical assessment of the situation. The layout was rewriting itself, a labyrinth designed not to confuse, but to feed reveal. I chased the cat, the metallic tang of ozone stinging my nostrils with each step. The air grew heavy, viscous, pressing against my lungs. The feeling returned, the unsettling sensation of tiny brittle bones shifting beneath my skin. It was subtle, a phantom pressure, but undeniable. I ignored it. Analysis was the shield. The cat paused before a rusted elevator shaft, its form barely visible in the swirling smog. The metal was pitted, scarred with the passage of time and neglect. A faint oily scent emanated from the opening, a greasy sweetness that made my stomach churn. Purr thrum. The cat leaped, a black blur against the corroded steel, and landed squarely on the control panel. Its tail twitched, a deliberate gesture, and the elevator shuddered to life. The descent was slow, agonizingly slow. The foody groan of the cables was a physical weight in the air, a metallic lament that echoed the whispers in my head. The smog thickened, a suffocating fog that blotted out any semblance of light. It wasn't just visual, it felt tactile, clinging to my skin like a shroud. The feeling of brittle bones intensified, a creeping unease that threatened to unravel my composure. I focused on the cat, its eyes gleaming in the gloom, a silent, knowing observer. The Vorderthrum intensified, vibrating through the metal floor, resonating in my teeth. The whispers coalesced, forming fragmented phrases. "Verdient doesn't belong." The echo, the broadcast. I squeezed my eyes shut, attempting to block out the sensory overload, but it was futile. The compound was inside me now, a parasitic presence burrowing into my consciousness. Then, the elevator shuddered to a halt. The doors began to open, slowly, reluctantly, revealing nothing, absolute blackness. Not the absence of light, but an active void, a swallowing darkness that seemed to absorb all sound, all sensation. The smell of ozone was overwhelming, sharp enough to make my eyes water. I braced myself, expecting something. The cat remained motionless, a dark sentinel guarding the threshold. It let out a single, elongated fortipur thrum, a sound that seemed to vibrate not in the air, but directly within my skull. Then, the doors slammed shut. A shattering sound, like glass splintering, echoed in the suffocating darkness. The intercom siphon screamed it to life, not a single voice but 1,000, a swarming chorus of whispers and shrieks that erupted from the walls like blood from a wound. It wasn't just sound, it was a physical force, a pressure that hammered against my eardrums, vibrating the bones in my skull. My fingers clawed at my temples, but the pain didn't recede. It spread, a hot, needle-like agony radiating outward, and then the feeling hit me, the brittle bones beneath my skin, crackling, snapping, like dry kindling beneath my fingertips. Not an illusion, not a metaphor, fiti leviel. I stumbled forward, the soles of my sneakers squeaking against the grimy concrete, and the chamber yawned open before me, a cavern of shattered mirrors, their jagged edges glinting dully in the sickly yellow smog. The air smelled of copper and ozone thick enough to taste. My breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale scraping against the raw edges of my throat. The mirrors weren't just broken, they were shwilalive. Each reflection showed me dying. One version of me was sprawled across the floor, my ribs splayed open like a butcher's display, my fingers twitching in the dust. Another stood frozen, mouth stretched wide in a silent scream, my eyes blackened and weeping. And then there was the still one, the one that didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared. His face was mine, but wrong. The skin stretched too tight over the bones. The lips curled in something between a smirk and a grimace. The static from the intercom swelled, a resonant hum that vibrated through the soles of my feet, up my legs into my teeth. The mirrors began to shake, not from an outside force from within. The glass trembled, the fractures pulsing like veins, and then the reflections wind-twisted ved, the versions of me writhing in their own agony. Limbs bending at impossible angles, skin splitting open in slow-motion horrors. I reached out, my hand passing through the nearest mirror like it wasn't there. The cold seeped into my palm, a liquid absence, and then a thunder metek, not from the intercom, not from the mirrors, from thunder mirrors, found inside in my head. The cat was there, its obsidian form coiled on the ledge above, tail flicking in slow, deliberate strokes. Its purr wasn't a sound, it was a forfosai, a low-frequency pulse that synchronized with the vibrations in the glass, amplifying the horror. The mirror's swin screamed, a sound like 1,000 voices overlapping. And then the reflection swit moved T. One of them reached out. I jerked back as the version of me in the mirror lunged, fingers elongating into jagged claws, the glass warping like molten wax. The static became a roar, a cacophony of voices chanting my name, and the mirror's twin divitted harder, the fractures widening, the reflections widening, the reflections tearing themselves free from the glass. The chorus swelled into a single deafening note, a resonant fishatefa, and the mirrors collapsed inward. The mirror wasn't a mirror anymore. It was a wound, a jagged gash in the concrete wall that fitting breathed. The reflection inside it pulsed, my own face stretched and warped, fingers elongating into blackened talons as they clawed at my throat. The air smelled like burnt copper, like the moment before a circuit overloads, and the vision twin burned into the surface, the cracks glowing faintly, veins of orange light spiderwebbing through the grimy glass. My breath hitched, not mine, the version in the mirror choking on its own scream. But the sound wasn't sound. It was a vibration, a low-frequency thrum that rattled my teeth, my sternum, the marrow in my bones. The cat's purr was a knife dragged across a tuning fork, each vibration a physical force pressing against my ribs. I couldn't look away. The reflection's fingers twitched, the skin splitting open in slow motion, the blackened veins beneath pulsing like a second heartbeat. My own fingers trembled, hovering just above the surface. The glass wasn't cold, it was sweet-hungry, humming with the same resonant frequency as the cat's purr, amplifying the dread until it wasn't just in my head. It was wheat-weedy in my skin, tiny bones shifting, crackling, like dry kindling beneath my fingertips. I exhaled, but the breath stuck in my throat. The reflection's mouth opened wider, the scream building, a soundless howl that pressed against my eardrums. And then the mirror shattered, not outward, inward. The glass didn't splinter, it fractured like bone, each shard jagged and wet, glistening with the same orange light as the cracks. They didn't fall. They lunged. The first one pierced my wrist, the point driving deep, the edges serrated like a butcher's knife. I gasped, not from pain, but from the wrongness of it, the way the shard didn't cut flesh, but 20 bone, the vibration of the impact traveling up my arm into my shoulder, the marrow sent screaming in response. The cat's purr intensified, a resonant faint hum, and the next shard embedded itself in my thigh, the impact sending a jolt of static through my nerves. The compound vibrated, not the air, not the walls, vivint. The resonance wasn't in my ears, it was in my footy bones, a deep, pulsing thrum that synchronized with the cat's purr, with the reflection's agony, with the footy shatter of the mirror. The smog thickened, a yellow fog swallowing the fragments, the light dimming as if the world itself was being pulled into the abyss behind the glass. I reached for the next shard, my fingers closing around it, but it wasn't glass. It was swanbone cold and brittle, the edges sawing into my palm. The reflection's scream tore through me, not as sound, but as time to pressure, a force that pulled me forward into the mirror, into the dark. The cat's purr became a free-fire, a resonant note that vibrated through my skull, through my spine marrow, and then the blood hit the glass. Not a drop, a drip, a slow, viscous fall, the crimson pooling on the fragments, the reflection twisting, the edges of the wound smiling. The vibration spiked, the compound for groaning, and I fell. The floor beneath me wasn't floor anymore. It was a footy-live thing, a membrane of cracked concrete that pulsed with the slow, uneven rhythm of a dying heart. I pressed my palm against the wall, and the surface breathed back, the texture of sanded bone beneath my fingers. The compound wasn't just shifting, it was sous-vide unraveling. The seams between the walls stitching themselves shut with a wet, tearing sound, like flesh peeling away from muscle. The air smelled of ozone and something older, something too verdreed, the scent of a grave left too long in the sun. I knelt, fingers brushing the gritty carpet, and there it was, a logbook, its spine split open like a wound. The pages were yellowed, the ink smudged as if written in haste or in blood. The handwriting was frantic, looping and jagged. The words Fudiankasi and Fractions scrawled in margins like warnings. They are not mirrors. The first entry read, they are teeth. My thumb traced the edge of the paper, the fibers fraying beneath my touch, and the compound swid groaned in response, a deep, resonant twin creak that vibrated through my ribs. The walls shifted again, the concrete groaning like a ship in a storm, the ceiling tilting downward in slow motion, the yellow smog thickening into a full-living fog that coiled around my ankles. I flipped the page. The self is not a reflection, it is a cage. The ink bled into the paper, the letters running like water, and the vibration spiked, a fighting chime that resonated in my skull, in my suin marrow. The cat was there, of course, its obsidian claws clicking against the concrete as it circled my feet, its purr a knife dragging across the nerves in my spine. I didn't look down. I didn't tweet air. The logbook trembled in my hands. The compound front shuddered, the floor tilting beneath me, the walls fun breathing, in sync with the cat's purr, with the fun freeing through of the vibration, with the slow, wet fun tear of the concrete. A hidden door, always hidden, slid open behind a tapestry that wasn't a tapestry at all, just a skin stretched and glistening in the dim light. A staircase descended into blackness, the air below thick and heavy, like breathing liquid. The vibration pressed against my ribs, a physical force, and the logbooks screamed, not with words, but with a sound of tearing paper, of ink bleeding into the yellow smog. I reached for the door, my fingers brushing the edge of the tapestry skin, and the compound fodder groaned again, the walls seemed heaving like a living thing. The cat's purr intensified, a resonant hum that vibrated through my bones, through the thuddy marrow, and the logbook's pages integrated in my hands, crumbling into the smog, the words dissolving into nothing. The vibration spiked the floor, tilted in, and I fell. The fall wasn't a plummet, but a slide, a slow, deliberate descent into something that wasn't air, but a viscous, clinging darkness. The vibration peaked, a resonant chime that fractured the silence, and then abruptly ceased. I landed on something yielding, something that exhaled a puff of stale, sulphurous air. The smell clung to the back of my throat, a bitter, metallic tang. I pushed myself up, the floor beneath me slick and uneven. The blackness wasn't absolute. A sickly, pulsating light emanated from the walls, revealing a chamber of impossible scale. It was a cavern, carved from something that felt less like stone and more like flesh. The air grew heavy, a crushing pressure that settled in my chest, a physical manifestation of dread. Abyssal. The words surfaced in my mind, unbidden, a clinical observation rather than a feeling. The walls weren't smooth. They were covered in intricate carvings, patterns that shifted and writhed in the periphery of my vision. They seemed to be whispering, a low, guttural murmur that resonated not in my ears but directly within my skull. I ignored it. The compound was designed to induce sensory overload, a predictable response. The cat was there, of course, perched atop a pedestal of obsidian, its obsidian claws clicking against the stone with a precise, unsettling rhythm. Flick, click. Click. The sound amplified the vibration, a low hum that resonated in my teeth. It regarded me with eyes like chips of polished jet, utterly devoid of warmth, utterly foreknowing. Its purr was no longer a subtle tremor. It was a deafening resonance, a physical force pushing against my eardrums. I registered it as a data point. The cat's purr intensified the effects of the key supernatural object, a purely functional observation. The light originated from artifacts arranged along the walls, twisted metal sculptures etched with symbols that felt both ancient and disturbingly familiar. They burned with an inner light, a sickly jaundiced glow that cast grotesque shadows across the cavern. A hissing sound emanated from them, like escaping steam, or perhaps something more sinister. I noted the patterns within the artifacts, a spectral figure reenacting a fatal accident. The same figure I'd seen in the reflections, the same figure that haunted my dreams. This wasn't just a compound. It was a ritual site, a place where something significant had been performed. The architecture, the carvings, the artifacts, they all pointed to a deliberate construction, a carefully orchestrated convergence of energies. The walls were whispering ancient words, a language I didn't understand, yet somehow felt in the marrow of my bones. I focused on the pedestal. The cat remained motionless, a sentinel guarding some unspeakable secret. The pressure deepened, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate me. The floor felt as if it were pulling me downward, a slow, inexorable descent into the earth's core. I registered the feeling of tiny, brittle bones shifting under the skin of my forearms, a disconcerting sensory anomaly, a predictable response to the environment. The cat's claws clicked again, a sharp, precise sound that echoed in the cavern. A hidden lever rose from the pedestal, a gleaming piece of metal that seemed to pulse with the same sickly light as the artifacts. It was an invitation, an opportunity, or perhaps a trap. The possibilities were statistically equivalent. I approached the lever, my movements deliberate, my mind detached. The compound, the ritual site, the cat, they were all just components in a larger equation, a complex system of cause and effect. I extended my hand, my fingers brushing the cold, smooth metal. The vibration spiked, a brief, intense surge of energy that sent a jolt through my arm. I registered it as a data point. The lever clicked. A low, grinding sound echoed through the cavern as a massive stone door swung open, revealing another chamber beyond. The air that rushed out was even heavier, even more oppressive. The smell of sulfur intensified, mingling with a new, acrid scent that stung my nostrils. A scent I couldn't quite place. The cat remained on the pedestal, its obsidian eyes fixed on the open doorway. Its purr, a deafening resonance, seemed to mock my progress. I stepped toward the doorway, the darkness beckoning. The compound groaned. The chamber exhaled a breath of sulphurous air as I crossed the threshold, the heat of it pressing against my skin like a second layer of clothing. The walls pulsed faintly, a slow, rhythmic undulation beneath the jaundiced light of the artifacts. They weren't just relics, they were sutai's, watching, waiting. The symbols etched into their surfaces writhed, shifting like living things, and I realized with a detached curiosity that they were mirrors, fractured and distorted, reflecting not my image but the fragments of myself I'd left behind. The floor was slick beneath my boots, the surface slick with something dark and viscous. My breath came shallow, measured. The cat's purr still hummed in my skull, a low, resonant thrum-thrum that vibrated through my bones. It was waiting. The chamber opened into a circular space, its edges swallowed by shadows that seemed to breathe. At the center, a pool of blackened glass reflected nothing. Or rather, it reflected everything too much. The fragments of me stood in the fractured light, their forms wavering like heat haze. There were 5 of them. No, 6. The numbers shifted, unstable. One wore the uniform of my high school, crumpled, stained at the collar. Another stood in the posture of a detective, a trench coat draped over shoulders that were too broad, too front-wrong. Their hollow eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I thought I saw recognition. But recognition implies memory, and memory implies self, and I had none left to claim. The student Samuel tilted his head, his lips parting in a soundless scream. The detective Samuel's fingers twitched, his coat sleeves pooling around his wrists like spilled ink. The air between them shuddered, a physical distortion, as if the chamber itself recoiled. The bones beneath my skin shifted again, faster this time, 1,000 tiny cracks, a symphony of brittle snaps. I ignored it. Data point, sensory anomaly escalation predictable. The detective Samuel lunged first. His movement was a blur of motion, a tearing sound like fabric rending, and then he was gone non, not dissolved, not evaporated, but fonti unmade air, as if someone had reached into the glass and plucked him from existence. His scream was a wet, gurgling sound, swallowed by the shadows. The student Samuel staggered, his uniform darkening at the seams, and then he too was reaching for himself, his fingers clawing at his own chest. The tearing began with a wet twitch slick, a sound like a blade parting flesh, and his torso split open in a jagged line, his innards glistening in the sickly light. He did not scream. He only stared, his eyes wide and wet, as his own hands pulled him apart. The cat's purr intensified, a physical force pressing against my ribs. The chamber fivvy groaned, the walls flexing inward, and the remaining fragments of me. Three now two whirled toward me, their mouths open, their voices a chorus of whispers that slithered into my skull. I did not flinch. The last reflection stood alone now, his form steady in the fractured glass. He was fun to me, but sharper, colder. His eyes burned with a pale, sickly light, like embers in ash. The flames in the artifacts licked higher, casting long, grotesque shadows that writhed across the walls. The tearing sound filled the chamber, a wet, ragged Fischlippe, and I realized it was coming from Fuspentiv in mime. My own skin splitting along the seams, my fingers digging into my own arms as if I were trying to peel myself open. The reflection smiled. His teeth were too white, too perfect, a contrast to the rot creeping at the edges of his mouth. The flames reached for him, and he stepped forward, his form flickering like a dying bulb. The bones beneath my skin fracked again, louder this time, a chorus of snaps that echoed through the chamber. The cat's purr was a blade now, pressing into my skull, and I could feel the weight of the key supernatural object in my mind pulling me under. The reflection's fingers brushed the glass. The flames touched his face, and then he was smiling through the fire. The compound implodes with the sound of tearing silk. Walls down, fall. They unravel, like rotten fabric pulled apart at the seams, revealing the abyss beneath. Ash, not smoke, blooms from the cracks, a cinnamon dust that coats my tongue, gritty and thick. The smog's yellow veil dissolves into this fine, gray powder, choking the air. I stand rooted, the bones beneath my skin now a constant, brittle fiffin ticking, 1,000 tiny fractures echoing the compound's collapse. Data point structural failure rate exceeds 98%. Predictable, the resonant chime begins. Not heard, but tevet felter. A vibration deep in the marrow of my skull. A bell struck in the bone itself. It sinks with the tearing sound of the crumbling walls. A wet fitchlick that vibrates up my spine. The cattiest purr is a blade now pressing against my ribs, its obsidian claws digging into the air as it amplifies the chime. Schlick, 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 asterisk each note shatters the remaining glass fragments of my reflection. The last reflection steps from the shattered pool. Not a ghost, but Tevalefi alive. Its form solidifies, the burnt sienna of the ash clinging to its sharp angles. Its eyes burn with that sickly embers in. Ash light, brighter now, focused solely on me. It raises a hand. The obsidian claws gleam, impossibly sharp against the grimy concrete. The compound's vibration fades, not stops, but dissolves said, replaced by the oppressive, sucking weight of the abyss claiming the space where the sacred ground stood. The air thickens, pressing in like cold water. I feel the key supernatural object in my mind, not as a tool, but as a weight pulling me down into the dark, the reflection's lips part. The whisper isn't sound, but a vibration in the ash settling on my skin, a cold finger tracing my neck. We are the abyss. Asterisk the words aren't heard, they re-known etched into the marrow of my bones, as the last of the compound, says vibration fades into absolute silence. The abyss doesn't roar, it was sighs. A deep ancient exhale that vibrates through the ash beneath my boots. The reflection's hand lowers. The claws are now inches from the shattered glass, each tip a shard of polished obsidian. The embers in its eyes flare, casting long grasping shadows that wriggle across the ash-covered floor. The cat's purr ceases abruptly, leaving only the silence of the abyss pressing in. My own skin splits along the seams, a wet fishlup, as the fragments of me, what he has left, pull away from the center, dissolving into the ash. The bone cracking is louder now, a chorus of shattering glass, each snap a note in the silence. The reflection smiles. Its teeth are perfect white, stark against the rot creeping at its mouth. The flames from the artifacts lick its face, but it doesn't burn. It only watches, eyes burning with the light of the abyss. The ash swirls around its feet, not falling, but rising preen to meet it. The last fragment of me, my high school uniform stained and crumpled, vanishes into the dust, not with a scream but with a sigh. The reflection's fingers brush the air where my hand should be. We are the abyss. Asterisk the whisper is the last sound before the silence swallows the word whole. The compound is gone. The sacred grounds are dust. The reflection sighs hold the void, and it raises its hand. The obsidian claws gleaming as the abyss claims me.